She slipped the ring off before she walked in. 4 carats cushion cut the kind of stone that catches light from across a room. She dropped it into the left pocket of her jacket and zipped the pocket shut. Then she pushed through the side door of Covenant House on North Avenue, tied a plastic apron over her old college sweatshirt, pulled on latex gloves and took her place behind the serving counter, the way she had every Thursday evening for 14 months. She did not use her married name here. She did not drive her own car here. She came in a Honda Civic she kept in the back garage, and she told her husband she was at yoga. The line started moving at 5:30. She ladled soup and set bread on trays and did not look up. Then she looked up. The next woman in line was standing directly in front of her. The ladle stopped. Nadine knew that face. She had known that face her entire life. Nadine Calloway lived in Guilford, the part of Baltimore where the lawns are wide and the fences are wrought iron, and the only sound at night is the sprinkler system clicking on at 11:15 because someone programmed it that way. 7 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, a kitchen with a marble island the size of a twin bed and copper pots hanging from a rack above the stove that had never once been used for cooking. Dwight Calloway had bought the house 4 years ago when his 3rd development deal closed, and the number on the wire transfer had enough zeros to make the realtor go quiet on the phone for a full 3 seconds before saying, "Congratulations." 12 commercial buildings across the city, 3 urban redevelopment projects, 2 in Remington, and 1 along the waterfront near Canton. His name was in the business section of the Baltimore Sun twice a year, and on a brass plaque outside a community center in Pigtown that he had funded because he remembered what it was like to grow up in a neighborhood that did not have one. Nadine was 36 years old. She had married Dwight when she was 28. She had a closet the size of her childhood bedroom and a personal shopper at Nordstrom who knew her measurements by heart and a standing reservation at Woodbury Kitchen for Friday evenings. She had everything a person could reasonably want and several things no person actually needs. Every Thursday, at 5:15, she told Dwight she was going to yoga. She said it the same way every time, casually, already halfway to the door, keys in hand. He never questioned it. He was usually on a call or reviewing plans at the dining table that seated 12 and rarely held more than 2. She walked past her black Range Rover in the main garage and kept going to the back garage where the Honda Civic sat under a dust cover, 2009 model. Paid off since her junior year at Howard. She had kept it when Dwight offered to sell it because she said it had sentimental value. That was true, but not in the way he understood it. She drove 6.2 miles south and east, from Guilford to North Avenue. There are distances measured in miles, and there are distances measured in something no map has ever learned to draw. This was both. The houses got shorter. The streetlights changed. The sidewalks cracked in places that had been cracked the same way for a decade because no one had filed the work order or because someone had filed it and it sat in a pile with 900 others. She pulled into the lot behind Covenant House at 5:25 every Thursday and parked between a dumpster and a chain-link fence and sat in the car for 2 minutes before going in, not to prepare herself, to stop being the other version of herself. To let Nadine Calloway sit in the driver's seat while Nadine Price walked through the back door. She had been doing this for 14 months, every Thursday, 5:30 to 9 in the evening. She ladled soup and plated bread and sorted donated cans in the back room and mopped the floor after the last person left. She served between 130 and 160 meals a night, depending on the weather, because when it rained, the line got longer, and when the temperature dropped below 40, the line got longer still, and in January, the line sometimes stretched past the parking lot and around the corner, onto Greenmount Avenue. Nobody at the shelter knew her married name. Nobody knew about Guilford or the Range Rover or the copper pots. The staff called her Nadine. The regulars called her Miss Price. A woman named Delphine, who came every Thursday and always asked for extra bread, once told her she had kind hands. Nadine had gone home that night and sat in her car in the garage for 11 minutes before going inside. She had not told Dwight. Not because she thought he would object. Dwight was not that kind of man. She had not told him because if she told him, it would become something else. It would become a project, It would become a donation with a press release. It would become the kind of goodness that has a name on it, and the moment goodness has a name on it, it changes shape. She did not want it to change shape. She wanted it to stay exactly what it was, a woman behind a counter, a ladle in her hand, the quiet way it felt to be useful without being known. But there was something else, something she had not said out loud to anyone, including herself. Every Thursday night, when she looked down the line, she was looking for something. Not consciously, not with a plan, but her eyes moved over every face, every pair of hands holding a tray, every set of shoulders carrying the particular posture of someone who had been standing in lines for a long time. She was looking for someone. She had been looking for 14 months. And on this Thursday in November, she found her. The recognition did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces the way it always does when the mind encounters something it has been carrying for years in a locked room, and suddenly the door is open and the hallway is flooded with light. First it was the shoulders. The way the woman held the tray, left hand underneath, right hand gripping the edge the same way their mother used to carry a casserole dish from the oven to the table in the kitchen on Eager Street. Then, the angle of the neck, tilted slightly forward and to the left, the posture of a person who has gotten used to not being looked at and has stopped expecting it. Then the cheekbones, sharper than they used to be. The kind of sharp that does not come from intention. It comes from subtraction, from the body slowly giving up the things it can no longer afford to keep. Then the eyes. The ladle stopped. Soup dripped from the edge of it onto the counter. Nadine did not notice, because those were not a stranger's eyes. Those were Opal Price's eyes. Dark brown wide, set the kind of eyes that looked at you and made you feel like you had been fully and completely read in a single glance. Their mother's eyes. And the woman carrying them in her face was Celine, 42 years old. Nadine's older sister. The person she had not spoken to in 9 years. Celine had not looked up yet. Her eyes were on the tray, on the empty plate sitting on it, on the small square of table space directly in front of her. She was looking down the way people look down when they have been in enough lines to know that looking up does not change anything about what happens next. You wait. You move forward. You take what is given. You find a seat. That is the choreography of need, and Celine had learned every step of it. Nadine stood completely still. The line kept moving behind Celine. A man in a gray coat shifted his weight. A woman 2 places back adjusted the strap of her bag. The fluorescent light above the serving counter buzzed the way it always did, the low electrical hum that became part of the room after a while, like a sound the building made just by being alive. A volunteer named Shonda, who worked the bread station every Thursday, glanced over. She said, "You okay?" Nadine did not answer. She was looking at her sister's hands. The nails were short, uneven cut with something that was not a proper nail clipper. The knuckles were dry. The left ring finger was bare. The last time Nadine had seen that finger, it had a gold band on it, thin, simple, the ring Terence Barrow had saved for 8 months to buy. Celine shifted the tray. She looked up. 9 years collapsed into the 2 feet of counter space between them. Every unanswered phone call, every holiday that passed without a word. Every night, Nadine had picked up her phone, typed a message, stared at it, and deleted it. Every single one of those moments, now standing in this room under fluorescent light on North Avenue on a Thursday in November. Celine's lips parted. She said one word, "Nadine." Not a question. Not exactly. The kind of sound a person makes when something they thought they had finished dealing with walks back into the room and their body reacts before their mind has time to decide what to do about it. Nadine opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Shonda asked again, louder this time, "Nadine, you all right?" The man in the gray coat leaned to the side to see what was happening. 2 women at the far table stopped eating and looked toward the counter. She was not okay. She was standing 3 feet from her sister in a homeless shelter on North Avenue, and the distance was the closest they had been in 9 years, and she did not know what to do with any of it. Not one single piece. Before there was Guilford, before there was Dwight, before there was the shelter on North Avenue, or the Honda Civic in the back garage, or the ring that got zipped into a jacket pocket, every Thursday evening there was Eager Street. Number 1847, East Baltimore. A row house with a cracked front step and a screen door that did not latch properly, and a kitchen so small that two people standing in it at the same time had to turn sideways to pass each other. Opal Price raised two daughters in that house by herself after their father left in 1993, the year Nadine turned 3 and Celine turned 9, the year the front door closed behind him on a Wednesday afternoon and never opened for him again. Opal did not talk about him. Not then, not later, not ever. She took his photograph off the wall the following Saturday and put it in a box in the closet, and that was the end of that conversation for the rest of her life. What she did instead was work. She cleaned rooms at the Harbor Court Hotel from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, and then she took the number 11 bus to Fells Point, where she prepped vegetables and washed dishes at a restaurant called Renzo's from 4 in the afternoon until 10 at night. She got home at 10:45 if the bus was on time and 11:15 if it was not, and either way she walked through the front door and went straight to the kitchen and cooked. Every single night. It did not matter how late it was. It did not matter that her knees ached from 8 hours on hotel tile and her hands smelled like bleach and onion. She cooked rice and beans. Baked chicken thighs. Collard greens from the can when fresh ones were not on sale, and fresh ones when they were. Cornbread from a box mix that cost $1.19. She stood at the stove in the yellow light of that kitchen, and she cooked because that was the deal she had made with herself the night he left. The kitchen stays warm. That is how they know someone is home. $412 a month in rent. Electricity that ran $47 in winter because Opal kept the thermostat at 62 and told the girls to wear socks. A bus pass. Groceries. School supplies in September that she bought at the dollar store on Eastern Avenue 3 days before school started because that was when the prices dropped. Celine was the older one. 9 when he left. Old enough to understand what had happened. Old enough to step into the gap without being asked. She braided Nadine's hair every morning before school, 2 French braids pulled tight the way Opal liked them. She walked Nadine to school and picked her up and sat with her at the kitchen table doing homework until Opal got home. When she turned 16, she got a job at the corner grocery on Chester Street, bagging and stocking shelves 3 afternoons a week and all day Saturday for $5.50 an hour under the table, because the owner did not do paperwork for minors. She did not ask for credit. She did not ask for thanks. She did not ask for anything. She handed Opal $40 every other Friday, and Opal took it and put it in the kitchen drawer, and neither of them said a word about it, because words would have made it something that needed to be discussed, and discussed meant feelings. And feelings meant the possibility of something cracking open that neither of them had time to crack open. Nadine was the younger one, the reader. The one who brought home report cards with marks so high that Opal taped them to the refrigerator and left them there for months. The one who got a scholarship to Morgan State and then transferred to Howard University in Washington to study pre-law. The one who left. Every family divides itself this way, whether it means to or not. There is the one who flies and the one who stays on the ground and holds everything in place so the flying is possible. Both of them believe their role is natural. Both of them are wrong. The role is chosen quietly early, and by the time anyone notices the choosing has already been done, it is too late to undo it without undoing everything else that was built on top of it. Celine stayed. Nadine flew. And, for a long time, that arrangement held. It held the way most arrangements hold, not because it was fair, but because no one had the energy to examine whether it was. Celine did not go to college. That was never the plan, and she never pretended it was. She graduated from Mergenthaler Vocational High School in 2001 with a certificate in food service and a work ethic that could outlast most people half her age. She was 22 when she married Terrence Barrow. He was 25. A longshoreman at the Port of Baltimore, 3rd generation. His father had worked the same docks. His grandfather before that. Terrence had hands that were calloused across every knuckle, and a quiet way of being in a room that made people feel like things were going to be fine, even when there was no particular reason to believe they would be. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental on Luzerne Avenue in Highlandtown, 2nd floor above a woman named Mrs. Covington, who played gospel music every Sunday morning, loud enough to vibrate the dishes in the cabinet. Rent was $785 a month, Terrence brought home $2,200 after taxes and union dues. Celine worked prep at a diner on Eastern Avenue, chopping onions and peeling potatoes and mixing coleslaw in a steel bowl the size of a bathtub from 6:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Between the two of them, they had enough, not extra, enough. The kind of enough that works as long as nothing breaks. Jalen was born in 2004, 7 pounds 11 ounces. Celine used to say he came out looking like Terrence had stamped him. Same jaw, same serious forehead, same way of watching everything before deciding whether to participate. He was a quiet boy, good in school. Drew pictures of ships because his father talked about the port the way some men talk about churches. Terrence died on a Tuesday. October. Jalen was 7. A container crane malfunctioned during an offload, and the rigging failed and the load shifted, and Terrence was standing where nobody should have been standing, but where someone always had to stand because the job required it. The Port Authority investigation took 4 months. The settlement was $43,000. It sounds like a large number until you subtract the funeral, which cost $8,200. Then subtract 6 months of rent, while Celine figured out how to work 2 jobs and raise a boy who had stopped drawing ships. Then subtract groceries and electricity and the bus pass and the school supplies and the co-pays and the everything else that does not stop needing to be paid just because the person who helped pay it is gone. $43,000. It lasted 14 months. Celine went back to work 3 weeks after the funeral. Prep cook at the same diner in the morning. Office cleaning crew at a building downtown from 6 in the evening until 10 at night. She dropped Jalen at Mrs. Covington's apartment on her way out and picked him up on her way back, and Mrs. Covington never once asked for money because that is what neighbors did on that block, and Celine remembered that for the rest of her life. Then Jalen got sick. He was 10. The first crisis came in the middle of a school day. The school nurse called Celine at the diner and said, "Your son is in severe pain and you need to come now." Sickle cell disease. The doctors explained it carefully and thoroughly, and Celine listened to every word and understood that what they were really saying, underneath all the medical language, was that her son's blood was going to betray him for the rest of his life, and there was no cure, and management was expensive. The first hospital stay was 3 days. The bill was $14,000. Insurance covered part of it. Not enough. The next crisis came 8 months later. 5 days. $23,000. Insurance covered less the second time because of the way the deductibles reset and the way the out-of-pocket maximum only sounds like a maximum until you read the fine print about what counts toward it and what does not. After that, Celine stopped counting the bills. She put them in a drawer in the kitchen and closed the drawer and opened it only when she had money to send, and the money was never enough, and the drawer kept filling. She lost the apartment on Luzerne Avenue when Jalen was 13. Moved in with a friend from the diner, a woman named Taneka, who had a spare room in Park Heights. Taneka got a job offer in North Carolina 8 months later and left. Celine moved to a motel on Pulaski Highway. $49 a night. She stayed 11 days. Then she could not stay anymore. She walked into Covenant House on North Avenue on a Wednesday in June with a duffel bag and her son's birth certificate in a plastic folder and signed her name on a clipboard at the front desk and was given a bed in a room with 3 other women and a locker that locked with a combination she chose and immediately forgot because her hands were shaking. Jalen was 19 by then. He was staying with a friend in Dundalk and working the night shift at the Amazon warehouse in Sparrows Point, loading boxes from 11 at night until 7 in the morning for $17.65 an hour. She had not told him where she was sleeping. She told him she was at a friend's place. He did not ask which friend. Maybe he knew. Maybe he did not want to know. Some questions stay unasked because both people understand that the answer would require something neither of them has the strength for right now. Celine had been at the shelter for 5 months the night she walked up to the serving counter and saw her sister standing behind it, but she did not call Nadine, not once in all of that, not when Terrence died, not when Jalen got sick, not when the apartment was gone, not when the motel money ran out, not once. And to understand why she did not call, you have to go back further, to the thing that broke between them, The thing that had Opal's name on it. Opal Price was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in 2011. She was 58. The same age she had been working since she was 17, the same body that had cleaned hotel rooms and scrubbed restaurant floors and stood at the stove every night for 2 decades. The body had finally started sending invoices for all of it. At first, it was manageable. Medication, diet changes. Celine handled it. She went to every appointment. She learned to check blood sugar levels. She adjusted Opal's meals and bought the test strips and drove her mother to the clinic on Broadway every 6 weeks. She did not ask Nadine for help because Celine did not ask anyone for help. That was not how she was built. Asking meant admitting she could not do it alone. And admitting she could not do it alone meant the whole structure she had built her identity on would need to be examined, and she was not prepared to examine it. Then the complications started. Kidney function declining, peripheral neuropathy in both feet, vision problems. Opal needed insulin injections twice a day and monitoring that Celine provided by waking up at 5 in the morning before her own shift started and driving to Eager Street and sitting in the kitchen while Opal drank her tea and pretended she was fine. Nadine was 27 by then, married to Dwight for 2 years, living in Guilford. She came to visit Opal and saw the progression and made a decision that she believed was correct and generous and necessary. She found a care facility in Towson. Good ratings, clean rooms, 24-hour nursing staff. She told Opal and Celine she would cover the full cost, every month. No discussion needed. Celine looked at her across the kitchen table on Eager Street. The kitchen where Opal had cooked every night for 20 years. The kitchen that stayed warm. She said, "No." Nadine said, "Celine, she needs professional care. I can make sure she gets it." Celine said, "She is getting care. I am giving her care every single day. I wake up at 5 in the morning and I drive here and I sit with her and I check her levels and I make sure she eats and I do it before I go to work and I do it after I come home and I have been doing it for 3 years." Nadine said, "I know that. I am not saying you have not been doing it. I am saying there is a better option now." Celine said, "Better? You mean more expensive?" Nadine said, "I mean safer. I mean staffed. I mean she would have someone watching her around the clock instead of you trying to do everything alone." Celine stood up. The chair scraped across the linoleum. She said, "You think money fixes everything. You married money, and now you think you can buy your way back into this family," Nadine said. "That is not what this is." Celine said, "Help. You left. You left and you built a life, and you visit twice a year with flowers and a check, and you call that help." Nadine said, "I am trying to help. That is all I have ever tried to do." Celine said, "You want to put Mama in a building in Towson so you can feel better about not being here. That is what this is. This is not about her. This is about you." Neither of them was entirely wrong. That was the worst part. There are arguments where both sides are right, and those are the kind that never heal because there is no one to forgive except yourself, and most people are not willing to do that work. Celine was right that she had given more of her daily life to Opal's care than Nadine ever had. Nadine was right that Opal's condition had passed the point where love alone was enough to manage it. Both of them were standing in that kitchen saying true things in voices that made the truth sound like a weapon. Opal sat at the table between them. She did not say a word. She looked at her daughters the way a woman looks at 2 things she built that have turned against each other, and she understands that the fault line runs right through her. 3 weeks later, Opal had a stroke. She died at Johns Hopkins on a Saturday morning in March. Celine was in the room. She had been there since Thursday. Nadine arrived 40 minutes after the call. They stood on opposite sides of the bed, then opposite sides of the casket, then opposite sides of a silence that lasted 9 years. After Opal's funeral, the kitchen on Eager Street went cold. Nobody cooked in it again. The row house was cleaned out in April by Celine alone because she would not let anyone else touch it. She packed the plates and the pots and the yellow dish towels and the jar of cayenne pepper that Opal kept on the second shelf, and she put everything in boxes and put the boxes in storage and locked the unit. And that was the last time the Kitchen existed in any form other than memory. The stove went cold. And it stayed cold. And the promise Opal had made to herself the night their father left, the promise that the kitchen stays warm, that is how they know someone is home. That promise died with her. Or so it seemed. Now here they were, standing 3 feet apart in a shelter on North Avenue on a Thursday in November. Nadine on one side of the counter, Celine on the other, the fluorescent light above them, buzzing its low electric hum. The line of people behind Celine, shifting, waiting, some of them watching, and some of them looking away, the way people do when they can feel that something private is happening in a public space, and they are not sure whether to witness it or give it room. Celine's lips had formed Nadine's name, one word, not a question. The reflex of a body recognizing something before the mind has granted permission. Nadine had not responded. She was still holding the ladle. Soup was dripping from the edge of it onto the stainless steel counter in a slow, steady rhythm that neither of them heard. Nadine set the ladle down. She stepped sideways away from the serving station. She pulled the latex gloves off one at a time and put them on the counter beside a stack of bread plates. She walked around the end of the counter and came to the other side where the line was and stood directly in front of Celine. 3 feet, the closest they had been in 9 years, close enough to touch. Neither of them touched. The man in the gray coat had moved to the side. The 2 women at the far table were still watching. Shonda had stopped asking questions and was standing very still with a bread knife in one hand and her other hand flat on the counter. A boy who could not have been more than 8 years old was tugging on his mother's sleeve 3 places back in line, saying something about being hungry, and his mother put her hand gently on top of his head without looking down, because she too was watching the 2 women standing in front of each other in the middle of the room. Celine looked at Nadine. She looked at the apron. She looked at the plastic gloves sitting on the counter. She looked at the sweatshirt old, the kind of thing you do not wear if you are trying to impress anyone. She looked at her sister's face the way you look at a place you used to live when you drive past it years later. And it looks almost the same, but something about the light has changed. She said, "What are you doing here? Not how are you? Not I missed you. Not why did you stop calling? What are you doing here?" Because that was the only question that made sense to Celine at that moment. The only one she had room for. Nadine said, "I volunteer here. Every Thursday." Celine looked at her for a long time. Then she looked down at the tray in her hands, the empty plate, the empty cup. The way her fingers were gripping the edges with the particular tightness of a person who is holding something because letting go would mean her hands would have nothing to do and she did not trust what they might do next. She said, "How long?" Nadine said 14 months. Something moved through Celine's face. It was not softness, not yet. It was the particular expression of someone doing arithmetic they did not expect to have to do. 14 months. Every Thursday. Her sister had been standing behind this counter for 14 months, and Celine had been coming here for 5, and somehow in all of that time their Thursdays had never overlapped until tonight. Or maybe they had. Maybe Celine had come on a Thursday before, and Nadine had been here, and neither of them had seen the other, because Celine kept her eyes down in lines the way she had learned to do, and Nadine looked at every face, but was looking for something she expected to find, and the thing she found was not what she expected. The room held its breath, not the comfortable quiet of a room where nothing is happening, the other kind. The kind that fills a space when 2 people are standing in it, and every other person can feel the weight of what exists between them, even though none of them know a single thing about what it is. Nadine said, "Can we go outside?" Celine did not answer right away. She looked at the soup counter. She looked at the line that had started moving again behind her, because people who are hungry do not stop being hungry just because something important is happening to someone else. She looked at the tray in her hands. She set it down on the edge of the counter. She said, "Okay." To understand where Celine was standing that night, not just in the room but in her life, you need to understand something about this country. Not the version of it that appears in speeches or on postcards, the version that shows up in numbers. On any given night in America, roughly 650,000 people do not have a place to sleep that belongs to them. That number is not a guess. It comes from the Department of Housing and Urban Development's annual point-in-time count, which sends volunteers into streets and shelters across every state to count the people the rest of the country prefers not to see. 650,000. That is more than the entire population of Baltimore. And here is the part most people do not know. 40% of people experiencing homelessness in America had a job within the past 12 months. They worked, they clocked in and clocked out and paid taxes and bought groceries and did everything they were supposed to do, and they still ended up in a line at a shelter on a Thursday night holding an empty tray. Medical debt is the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. 2 out of every 3 bankruptcy filings are connected to medical bills. Not gambling, not reckless spending, not poor decisions, a hospital bill, an illness. A diagnosis that arrives without warning and without concern for whether the person receiving it has the insurance to absorb it. Sickle cell disease affects approximately 100,000 Americans. The vast majority of them are Black. The average annual cost of treatment ranges from $10,000 to $30,000, depending on the severity and the frequency of crises. That is, per year. Not per crisis, per year. And sickle cell is a lifelong condition. There is no point at which the bills stop arriving. The distance from stable employment to homelessness in America is not as far as most people believe. Research from multiple housing organizations shows that for most families living paycheck to paycheck, it takes one catastrophic event, one job loss, or one medical emergency, or one death, followed by 4 to 6 months of financial erosion, before the math simply stops working. Not because the person stopped trying, because the numbers ran out of room. Celine did not become homeless because she failed. She became homeless because her husband died and her son got sick and the insurance was not enough and the bills kept coming and the rent kept rising and every dollar she earned went somewhere it was supposed to go and there was simply not enough of it to go everywhere it needed to be. Every step she took made sense at the time. Every decision was the right one given the options she had. And she still ended up in a line at Covenant House, holding a tray. Homelessness is not a character trait. It is a coordinate. A point on a map that a person arrives at through a series of events that are often entirely beyond their control. And the distance from where most people are standing to that coordinate is shorter than anyone wants to believe. That is the thing about the line at the shelter. The people in it are not a different species. They are not a different category of human being. They are people for whom the math stopped working. That is all, and the math can stop working for anyone. Every number in the last few paragraphs is a piece of Celine's story. She is not a statistic, but every statistic is someone like her. They went out the back door. There was a concrete bench against the wall of the building next to a dumpster and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes that someone had tied with twine and left for recycling pickup. The air was November in Baltimore, which means it is not yet winter, but winter has sent word that it is coming. 41 degrees. Their breath made small clouds that disappeared before they reached the streetlight. Celine sat down first. She put the tray on the bench beside her. The empty plate was still on it. She had not eaten. Nadine sat on the other end, not close, not far. The distance two people choose when they are not sure yet whether they are having a conversation or an exit. Neither of them spoke for a while. The sounds from inside the shelter came through the wall muffled, chairs scraping, the clatter of trays being stacked, someone laughing the kind of laugh that sounds like it surprised the person making it. A car passed on North Avenue, with its radio playing something Nadine could not identify. Then it was quiet again. Celine spoke first. She did not look at Nadine when she started. She looked at the parking lot, at the chain-link fence, at the Honda Civic sitting between the dumpster and the fence, and something in her expression shifted slightly when she saw it as if she recognized the car from another life and was deciding whether to mention it. She did not mention it. She said Terrence died. She said it flat, no weight on any particular word. The voice of a person who has said a sentence so many times inside her own head that it has worn smooth like a stone in a river. She said port accident. Jalen was 7. Nadine did not interrupt. She sat very still the way a person sits when they understand that the thing happening right now is not a conversation. It is a door opening, and whatever comes through it needs to come through at its own speed, Celine said. After that, it was just me and him. I worked 2 jobs, prep cook at the diner, cleaning crew at night. We were okay for a while. She paused. She said, then Jalen got sick, sickle cell. His first crisis, he was 10. Hospital for 3 days, $14,000. She said insurance paid some of it, not enough. He went back 8 months later, 5 days that time, $23,000. After that, I stopped opening the envelopes. She told it in pieces, not in order. The way memory works when it has been compressed into something a person can carry without collapsing under it. She said she lost the apartment when Jalen was 13. She said she stayed with a friend for a while. She said the friend moved. She said there was a motel on Pulaski Highway for 11 days at $49 a night. She said, I sold the ring. Nadine looked at her. Celine said, Terrence's ring. The wedding band. I sold it to pay the second hospital bill. A pawn shop on Bel Air Road gave me $380 for it. She said he saved for 8 months to buy that ring, 8 months of overtime at the port. She looked at her bare left hand. She said, $380. That is what 8 months of a good man's overtime is worth at a pawn shop on a Tuesday afternoon? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Jalen is 19 now. He is staying with a friend in Dundalk. Works the night shift at the Amazon warehouse out at Sparrows Point. 11 at night to 7 in the morning. $17.65 an hour. She said he does not know I am here. I told him I am staying with a friend. Nadine said Celine. Celine said do not. Nadine said, why did you not call me? The question sat between them on the concrete bench in the November air. It sat there the way certain questions sit when both people already know the answer and the asking is not really asking. It is reaching. It is a hand extended across a distance that words alone cannot cross. Celine was quiet for a long time, long enough that a car passed on North Avenue and its headlights swept across the parking lot and moved on, and the dark came back. Long enough that Nadine could hear the hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of dishes being washed inside. Then Celine said, you know why? 3 words. They carried 9 years in them. Every unanswered call, every deleted message, every holiday, every birthday. Every moment Celine had picked up her phone and looked at Nadine's name in her contacts and put the phone back down, because calling would mean admitting she needed something, and admitting she needed something would mean the wall she had built to survive was not as solid as she needed it to be. Nadine did not push. She sat with the answer the way you sit, with something heavy that has been placed in your lap. You do not put it down. You do not hand it back. You hold it, because holding it is the only honest thing to do. She said, I looked for you. She said it quietly, the same flat voice Celine had been using, as if the two of them had agreed without speaking to keep everything at the same temperature so that nothing in this conversation would boil over. She said twice, I searched online. I called people we used to know in East Baltimore, Mrs. Covington, Taneka. Nobody had a number for you. Celine did not respond to that. Nadine said, I did not look hard enough. I know that. I could have hired someone. I could have tried harder. I did not, because I was afraid of what I would find. She said, and I was afraid that if I found you, you would look at me the same way you looked at me in Mama's kitchen that day, and I was not sure I could take that again. There are certain kinds of goodness that can only survive in the dark. The moment light hits them, they do not disappear. They change shape, and sometimes the new shape is no longer something anyone believes. Nadine had understood this without ever putting it into words. It was the reason she had kept the shelter a secret, not from shame, from something closer to preservation. The preservation of the one place in her life where she was not Nadine Calloway, where she was just Nadine Price behind a counter with a ladle, doing something small and useful and invisible. She said, I did not tell Dwight, because if I told him, it would become something else. It would become a check with his name on it, a press release, a photograph in the Sunday. And the moment that happens, every bowl of soup I serve stops being a bowl of soup. It becomes a performance. And I cannot do that. I cannot turn this into that. Celine was watching her now, not with warmth, not yet. but with something that had not been there 5 minutes ago: attention. The particular quality of attention a person gives when they are hearing something they did not expect to hear and they are not sure yet what to do with it. Nadine said, "Mama used to say the kitchen stays warm. That is how they know someone is home." She paused. She looked at the back door of the shelter, at the light coming through the small window in it, at the steam rising faintly from somewhere inside. She said, "I come here every Thursday because this is the only kitchen I have left. The one on Eager Street is gone. The one in Guilford has never been warm. This one is." She said, "I did not know I was looking for you, but I think I was. Every Thursday, every face in every line. I think some part of me knew that if I stood behind that counter long enough, one of those faces would be yours." Celine looked at her for a long moment. Something in her expression was working, moving. The way ice moves when it is just beginning to crack, not breaking yet not open, but no longer solid in the same way it was a moment ago. Then it stopped. The crack sealed itself. Celine's jaw set. Her shoulders pulled back. The posture of a woman who has survived by carrying her own weight and has been doing it so long that accepting help feels like admitting the carrying was a mistake. She stood up. She said, "I do not need this." Nadine did not move. Celine said, "I do not need you sitting here with your volunteer apron feeling sorry for me." Nadine said, "That is not what this is." Celine said, "Then what is it?" "Because from where I am standing, it looks exactly like what happened with Mama. You show up with your money and your good intentions, and you expect me to be grateful." Nadine said, "I do not have money on me right now. I am sitting on a bench behind a shelter in a sweatshirt that I have owned since college. I am not here with money. I am here because I come here every Thursday." Celine said, "You come here because it makes you feel better about everything you have. About the house and the car and the husband and the life you built while I was selling my husband's ring for $380 at a pawn shop." The words landed. They landed the way words land when they are aimed at the exact place a person is most afraid of being hit. Nadine did not flinch. Not because the words did not reach her. They reached her completely. But she had learned a long time ago, sitting in the kitchen on Eager Street, watching Opal take hit after hit from a life that never once went easy on her, that flinching does not make the blow lighter. It just tells the world where to aim next time. Pride is a complicated thing. Sometimes it is armor. Sometimes it is a wall. And most of the time it is both at once, and the person wearing it cannot tell the difference. Celine's pride had kept her alive through every crisis, and every loss, and every night in a shelter bed, surrounded by strangers. It had kept her standing when everything else had fallen. But it was also the thing that would not let her sit on this bench next to her sister, and accept that maybe, after 9 years, and everything that had happened, the hand being extended was not charity, it was family. And there is a difference between the two that pride is not always able to see. Celine turned and walked back through the door into the shelter. The door closed behind her. The sound it made was not a slam. It was the quiet click of a latch catching. That was worse. A slam is a statement. A click is a decision. Nadine sat on the bench. She did not go after her. She had learned that about Celine a long time ago. You do not chase Celine. You do not grab her arm or raise your voice or stand in her way. Celine is the kind of person who has to decide for herself when to come back, and if you push, the coming back takes longer. Sometimes it does not happen at all. She sat there in the 41-degree air on the concrete bench behind the shelter on North Avenue. She could see her breath. She could hear the city, a siren somewhere east distant, the kind that fades before you can figure out if it was an ambulance or a fire truck. Traffic on North Avenue. The steady background hum of a city that keeps moving regardless of what is happening to any individual person inside it. She sat there for a long time. She did not cry. She did not call Dwight. She did not get up and go to her car. She sat there, the way a person sits when they have just been told the truth about themselves by someone who knows them well enough to make every word count, and they need a moment before they can stand up and figure out what to do with it. The light inside the shelter went off in the dining area, then the hallway light, then just the glow of the exit sign above the back door, red steady, the only thing still visible from where she was sitting. She stayed. She drove the 6.2 miles back to Guilford the way she always did, north on Greenmount, west on 33rd, then north again through the part of the city where the streetlights get brighter and the sidewalks get wider and the trees start appearing in rows along the curb like someone planned for them to be there and someone else made sure they stayed. The houses got bigger. The fences got taller. The distance between front doors grew until each house sat on its own piece of quiet, the way expensive things sit in display cases with space around them, so you understand they are not meant to be touched. She pulled into the driveway at 11:14. The motion sensor light above the garage clicked on. The lawn was perfect. It was always perfect because a crew came every Tuesday and trimmed it to a height that someone had specified in a contract she had never read. She sat in the Honda Civic for a while with the engine off and her hands still on the wheel. The dashboard clock glowed green in the dark. She could see the house through the windshield. 7 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a sunroom she had used twice, a dining table that seated 12 and almost never held more than 2 plates. She went inside through the side door that led directly into the kitchen. She did not turn on the light. The kitchen was large enough to hold the entire first floor of the row house on Eager Street. Sub-zero refrigerator, a marble island with a waterfall edge that the designer had called a statement piece when they installed it 3 years ago. 6-burner range, professional grade, the kind that restaurants use. Copper pots hanging from a ceiling rack above the stove. None of them had ever been used, not once. The stove was cold. It was always cold. This was a kitchen that had everything a kitchen could have except the one thing that made it a kitchen: warmth. The kind that comes from someone standing at the stove at 10:45 at night making rice and beans because the kitchen stays warm, and that is how they know someone is home. Nadine sat down at the island in the dark. She put her elbows on the marble and her face in her hands, and she stayed like that. Dwight found her 11 minutes later. He had been in the study reviewing plans for the Canton waterfront project. He came downstairs for water and saw the shape of her sitting at the island in the dark, and he did not turn on the light, and he did not ask what was wrong. He pulled out the stool next to hers and sat down. He put his hands flat on the marble and he waited. That was the kind of man Dwight Calloway was, not the kind who walks into a room and needs to fix what he finds. The kind who walks in and sits down and understands that sometimes a person needs 10 minutes of silence before they are ready to say the thing they came home carrying. They sat there together in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the microwave said 11:26. Outside, the sprinkler system clicked on right on schedule. The soft mechanical sound of water hitting grass in a yard where everything worked exactly as it was supposed to. Then Nadine told him. All of it. The shelter, 14 months, every Thursday, the Honda Civic, the name she used, the apron and the latex gloves, and the ladle and the line that started at 5:30. She told him about Celine, about the face in the line, about the 9 years, about the fight in Opal's kitchen and the funeral and the silence that followed. She told him about the bench outside, and the things Celine said, and the way Celine walked back inside, and the sound the door made when it closed. Dwight listened. He did not interrupt. He did not say, "I wish you had told me." He did not say, "Why did you keep this from me?" He did not say, "Let me help." He sat on the stool next to his wife in the dark kitchen of a house worth $4.2 million, and he listened the way a person listens when they understand that listening is not the thing you do before you speak. Sometimes it is the whole thing. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "What would your mother do?" Nadine looked at him. The question moved through her faster than thought. She did not have to search for the answer. It was already there. It had been there her entire life. Opal would not send money. Opal would not make a phone call. Opal would not arrange anything through anyone. Opal would show up. She would show up with a plate of food, and she would knock on the door, and she would hand it over, and she would say, "Eat while it is hot," and she would go back to her own kitchen. That is what Opal would do. That is what Opal always did. Not because it was a strategy, because it was the only language she trusted. Presence, the quiet, undeniable fact of being there. Dwight Calloway was worth $320 million. He owned 12 commercial buildings and had 3 development projects in various stages of construction across the city. His name was in the paper, and on plaques and on the side of a community center in Pigtown. But he had not always been this. His father, Curtis Calloway, was a plumber in West Baltimore who drove a white van with a dent in the passenger door and came home every evening with pipe grease under his fingernails that no amount of soap could fully remove. His mother, Yvette, taught 3rd grade at a public elementary school on Edmondson Avenue for 29 years. Dwight started his first company with $15,000 he had saved working construction during college summers. He built it slowly. He made mistakes. He nearly lost everything twice. Once in 2008 when the market collapsed, and once in 2012 when a deal fell apart and he owed more than he had. He knew the distance between having and not having because he had walked across it in both directions. And he knew something else. He knew that the most valuable thing a person with means can offer is not the means. It is the willingness to show up without attaching a condition to the showing up. Without making the recipient perform gratitude. Without turning the act of giving into an event that requires acknowledgement. He said, "Go back next Thursday. Do not look for her. Just serve." Nadine looked at him. He said, "If she comes, she comes. If she does not, you are still there. And she will know you are still there. That is enough," he said. "Your mother did not chase anyone. She did not knock on the door and then stand there waiting for a thank you. She knocked, she gave, she went back to her kitchen. That was it, every single night." He paused. He said, "Your sister does not need to be rescued. She needs to see that you are in the same place every Thursday. Not because of her, because that is where you chose to stand. And when she is ready, she will come back to the counter. But it has to be her choice. You cannot make it for her." Nadine sat with that. She sat with it the way a person sits with something that is entirely true and also entirely difficult. Because going back meant accepting the possibility that Celine would not be there. That the door had closed and the click of the latch was final. That 9 years and 1 conversation on a bench in November was not enough to undo what had been built between them. And also the possibility that it was. That somewhere in Celine, underneath the pride and the anger and the years the crack she had seen forming on that bench was still there, still working, still moving towards something. She said, "Okay." The following Thursday, Nadine drove the Honda Civic south and east through Baltimore at 5:05 in the afternoon. She parked in the same spot behind the shelter. She slipped the ring off and zipped it into her jacket pocket. She tied the apron. She pulled on the gloves. She took her place behind the counter at 5:28 and she started serving at 5:30. She did not look for Celine. She did not scan the line. She did not position herself at the end of the counter where she could see the door. She stood where she always stood, and she ladled soup and set bread on trays and looked at each face as it came, and treated each one the same way she treated every face on every Thursday for the past 14 months. With attention. With care. With the quiet, steady presence of a person who has decided that this is where she belongs on Thursday evenings, regardless of what happens or does not happen while she is here. The line moved. 60 people. 80. 100. The room filled with the sounds it always filled with, trays sliding on tables, chairs scraping on the floor, low conversation, the hiss of the kitchen vent, a child somewhere near the back asking for more bread, Shonda at the bread station humming something under her breath the way she did every week, a gospel tune that Nadine had never been able to identify but had come to associate so completely with Thursday nights that she could not imagine this room without it. She served. She did not count the trays. She did not watch the clock. She did not think about what might or might not happen. She worked, the way Opal had worked every night in the kitchen on Eager Street. Not because someone was watching, not because there was a reward at the end of it, because the work itself was the point. Then a tray slid in front of her. She looked up. Celine. Thinner than last week, or maybe it was the light. Or maybe it was that Nadine was seeing her with different eyes, now eyes that had spent a week carrying the things Celine had told her on the bench and the things Celine had said before she walked back through the door. Celine was wearing the same jacket, The same worn sneakers. Her hair was pulled back. Her hands were gripping the tray the same way they had gripped it last Thursday. Left hand underneath. Right hand on the edge. Opal's way. Celine did not speak for a moment. She looked at Nadine. She looked at the apron. She looked at the ladle. She looked at the counter and the bread plates and the steam rising from the soup pot and the line of people behind her who were waiting with the patient resignation of people who have learned that waiting is just another thing you do when you do not have the luxury of impatience. Then she said, "You came back." Nadine said, "I come every Thursday." Celine was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the man behind her shifted his weight. Long enough that Shonda glanced over from the bread station. Long enough that the steam from the soup pot curled up between them and dissolved into the fluorescent light above. Then Celine said Mama would have come every Thursday too. 7 words. They did not fix anything. They did not erase the 9 years or the fight in the kitchen or the things said on the bench or the sound of the door clicking shut. But they did something else. They opened a space. Small, careful, the size of a single sentence. And in that space, for the first time in 9 years, the name Opal Price existed between the two of them without blame attached to it, without accusation, without the weight of who had done more, or who had left, or who had stayed, or who had been right. Just their mother's name plainly said, with the quiet recognition that whatever had broken between them, the woman who had made them both was someone they still agreed on. They did not hug. They did not cry. They did not promise anything or plan anything or pretend that 7 words on a Thursday night in a shelter was the same thing as reconciliation. It was not. But it was the first step. And first steps do not need to be large. They just need to be real. Nadine ladled soup into the bowl on Celine's tray. She set a piece of bread beside it. She said, "Eat while it is hot." Something moved across Celine's face. The smallest shift, not a smile. Something before a smile. Something that a smile might grow from if given enough time and enough Thursdays. She picked up her tray. She walked to a table. She sat down. She ate. In the weeks that followed, Nadine did not write a check. She did not call a lawyer. She did not send a car or arrange a meeting or do any of the things that people with money do when they decide to solve a problem by throwing resources at it until the problem changes shape. What she did was smaller than that, and harder. She sat with Celine at a folding table in the back office of Covenant House on a Tuesday afternoon and helped her fill out an application for the Baltimore Transitional Housing Program. The program provided furnished apartments for up to 18 months for individuals and families moving out of emergency shelter. Rent was set at 30% of the tenant's income. Case managers helped with job placement and benefits enrollment and the dozens of small bureaucratic steps that stand between a person and stability in a system that was not designed to make those steps easy. The waiting list was long, but Covenant House staff wrote a referral letter, and Celine's caseworker submitted the application the following day. Transitional housing is not permanent housing. It is the bridge between the two. And what research has shown consistently is that the bridge matters more than almost anything else. People who move directly from shelter to permanent housing without that middle step are significantly more likely to return to homelessness within a year. The transitional period gives people time to rebuild income, rebuild credit, rebuild the daily architecture of a stable life that collapses so quickly and takes so long to put back together. It is not glamorous work. It does not make headlines. But it is the thing that actually works. Nadine did not pay for Celine's apartment. She helped Celine find the program that would. The difference between those two things is everything. One is rescue. The other is support. And Celine would not have accepted rescue. She had made that clear on the bench outside the shelter. And she had made it clear again in the kitchen on Eager Street 9 years ago. And she would make it clear for the rest of her life, because that was who she was. But support, the kind that sits beside you and fills out paperwork and does not ask for credit that she could accept. Slowly, carefully. The way a person accepts something when their hands have been clenched for a very long time and opening them takes more effort than anyone watching would guess. Nadine helped Celine update her resume. They sat at the dining table in Guilford, the one that seated 12, and Nadine typed while Celine talked. Prep cook. 7 years at the diner on Eastern Avenue. Cleaning crew. 4 years. She listed the skills that did not have certificates attached to them, because nobody gives you a certificate for raising a child alone or managing a household on $1,100 a month or keeping yourself and your son alive through 3 medical crises on an income that was never designed to absorb even one. Celine got a job in the cafeteria at Johns Hopkins Hospital, prep cook, 6:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon, $14.75 an hour, to start with benefits after 90 days. She stood in a kitchen that was larger than any kitchen she had ever worked in, and she chopped onions and peeled potatoes and mixed coleslaw in a steel bowl, and she did it the same way she had done it at the diner on Eastern Avenue and the same way Opal had done it in the kitchen on Eager Street. Because the hands remember, even when everything else has changed, the hands keep working. One Saturday afternoon in December, a young man knocked on the front door of the house in Guilford. Nadine opened it. Jalen Barrow stood on the porch, 19 years old, tall, Terrence's jaw, Opal's eyes. The same eyes Nadine had seen in the shelter line on Celine's face. He was wearing a work jacket and boots that still had warehouse dust on them, and he was holding a Tupperware container in both hands, the way a person holds something they have been told is important. He said, "I am Jalen. I am Celine's son." He said it formally, the way young people speak when they are in a house they have never been in before and are not sure of the rules. Nadine said, "I know who you are." He looked at her. He looked at the house behind her. He looked back at her face. He said, "My mama made this. She said to bring it to you." He held out the Tupperware. She said to tell you, eat it while it is hot." Nadine took the container. She opened it right there in the doorway. Collard greens. The smell hit her before she saw them. Garlic and vinegar and smoked turkey neck. Opal's recipe, the one she made every Sunday. The one Celine had learned by standing next to her at the stove on Eager Street and watching without being told to watch, because that is how recipes pass between people who love each other, not through instructions, through presence. "Eat while it is hot," Opal's words, said to her daughters every night in the yellow kitchen, said by Celine to Jalen, said by Jalen to Nadine on the porch of a house in Guilford on a Saturday afternoon in December. The sentence had traveled across 20 years and 2 generations and arrived exactly where it was always going. Nadine looked at Jalen. She said, "Do you want to come in?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." They sat at the kitchen island. The marble one, the cold one. Nadine put the collard greens in a pot on the 6-burner stove and turned the flame on low. For the first time since she had lived in this house, the stove was warm. The kitchen smelled like something someone had made with their hands. Jalen sat on the stool and told her about the warehouse and the night shifts and the friend's apartment in Dundalk, and she listened the way Dwight had listened to her without interrupting, without fixing, without anything except the full weight of her attention. The pot on the stove made a small sound. The greens were ready. The kitchen was warm. A Thursday evening, 4 months after the first Thursday. Covenant House on North Avenue, 528. The line forming outside. The fluorescent lights on. The soup pots full. The bread sliced and stacked on the counter, the way it was every week. Nadine stood behind the serving counter. She tied her apron. She pulled on the latex gloves. She picked up the ladle. But this Thursday she was not standing alone. Celine was beside her, not in the line, behind the counter, wearing the same plastic apron, the same latex gloves. She had signed up as a volunteer 3 weeks earlier. She had told the staff coordinator her name was Celine Barrow, and she was available Thursday evenings from 5:30 to 9, and she had experience in food service, and she did not need training because she had been on the other side of this counter for 5 months, and she knew exactly how it worked. Nobody in the line knew that one of the women behind the counter was the wife of a man worth $320 million. Nobody knew that the other one had slept in this building 5 months ago on a cot in a room with 3 other women. Nobody asked. The line does not ask those questions. The line moves forward, and the ladle dips into the pot, and the soup goes into the bowl, and the bread goes on the tray, and the person moves to a table and sits down and eats. That is all. The ladle does not ask who is holding it. It just serves. Nadine looked at Celine. Celine was ladling soup, left hand holding the pot steady, right hand gripping the ladle. The exact posture Opal used to hold when she stood at the stove on Eager Street. The angle of the wrist, the way the left hand braced against the rim, the slight forward lean. It was not learned. It was inherited. The way certain things pass through families, not through words or instruction, but through the body remembering what it watched 1,000 times before it was old enough to know it was learning. Nadine smiled. Small. The kind of smile that stays in the eyes and does not need the mouth to participate. The kitchen was warm. Not the kitchen in Guilford with the marble island and the copper pots. Not the kitchen on Eager Street with the yellow light and the cracked linoleum. This kitchen, the one with fluorescent lights and stainless steel counters and industrial soup pots and the smell of bone broth and disinfectant and bread. This kitchen, where two sisters stood side by side on a Thursday evening and served 147 meals to people who needed them. Some families break apart, not because love was missing, but because there was too much pride and too few words. And some families find their way back together not through money or grand apologies or dramatic reunions, but through something simpler, something repeated, showing up every Thursday, without promises, without conditions, just standing there, ladle in hand, ready. The stove on Eager Street went cold the day Opal died. It stayed cold for 9 years. But kitchens do not belong to buildings. They belong to the people who stand in them and decide that warmth is worth the effort. And on this Thursday evening on North Avenue in Baltimore, the kitchen was warm again. Not because of the stove, because of who was standing in front of it. This story is a work of fiction. Nadine is not real. Celine is not real. Dwight and Jalen and Opal are not real. The house in Guilford and the row house on Eager Street and the bench behind the shelter are invented. But the numbers are not. On any given night in America, roughly 650,000 people experience homelessness. 40% of them worked within the past year. 2 out of 3 personal bankruptcies in this country are tied to medical debt. Sickle cell disease affects 100,000 Americans, the vast majority of them Black, and the average cost of managing it runs between $10,000 and $30,000 per year, with no endpoint because there is no cure. Transitional housing programs, the kind Celine used in this story, exist in cities across the country, and they work. They are underfunded, underpublicized, and they work. Those numbers are real. The people behind them are real. And the distance between a stable life and an unstable one is far shorter than most people want to believe. This story was written because of a question. A simple one. If the person you loved most in the world fell into the worst circumstances of their life, would you know? And if you knew, would you go? And if you went, would you go the right way? Not with money, not with solutions, not with the version of help that makes the helper feel better and the person being helped feel smaller. Would you go with just yourself, with just your presence, with a plate of food and a knock on the door and the willingness to say nothing except eat while it is hot? That is the question Nadine had to answer. That is the question Celine had to let her answer. And the answer took 14 months of Thursdays, and a bench in November, and a door that closed, and a door that opened again. If this story moved you, or made you think about someone you have not spoken to in a long time, or made you wonder about the people standing in lines you drive past every day, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next story. And leave us a comment. We want to know what you think. Was Celine's pride a weakness, or was it the last piece of dignity she had left? And was Nadine's secret volunteering genuine kindness, or was it a way to ease her own guilt? There may not be a clean answer. Most real questions do not have one. Until next time, take care of the people who took care of you, even if they never asked you to.